6 months ago, I sat in a company-wide meeting and watched my manager present my project, my slides, my exact words, to a room of 200 people. While I sat in the third row and said absolutely nothing. She didn't even change the font. I want to start there because I think that image says everything you need to know about how this kind of theft usually happens. It's rarely dramatic. Nobody breaks into your office and steals a folder. It's quieter than that and slower, and it usually starts with something so small you almost don't notice it happening until you're sitting in a meeting. Watching your own work get applauded under someone else's name. My name is Jordan, and I want to tell you exactly how I found out my manager had been quietly claiming my work for over a year, and what happened after I stopped letting her get away with it. Stick with me through the whole thing, because the ending involves a phone call from someone 2 levels above her that she genuinely did not see coming. I'd been working at the company for about 3 years when this all started, in a mid-sized analytics firm that did data consulting for retail clients. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was good at it, and I'd built a quiet reputation internally as someone who could take a messy client problem and turn it into something clean and usable. My manager, a woman I'll call Patricia, had been in her role for about 5 years by that point, well-liked by upper leadership, well-spoken in meetings, generally seen as a strong, dependable presence on the team. What almost nobody above her level seemed to fully understand was how much of what made her look strong was actually built on the work of the people underneath her, myself very much included. It started innocently enough, the way these things usually do. About 2 years into my time there, I was assigned to a project rebuilding the client reporting dashboard for one of our biggest accounts. A retail chain that had been complaining for months about how confusing their existing reports were. It was a genuinely hard project, technically speaking, involving restructuring years of inconsistent data into something that could actually tell a coherent story to a non-technical executive team on the client side. I spent almost 4 months on it, most evenings and more than a few weekends, building something I was genuinely proud of. When it was finished, Patricia reviewed it, made a few small suggestions, and told me she'd present it to the client the following week. Since client-facing presentations for accounts of that size were typically handled at the manager level rather than by individual contributors. That part on its own was completely normal. I didn't expect to be the one standing in front of the client. I expected my name to be somewhere on the credit, even if just verbally, the way managers usually acknowledge whose work they're presenting. She never once mentioned my name to the client. Not my analyst built this, not someone on our team spent months on this. Just "we built this for you," phrased in a way that let the client walk away believing the entire redesign had come directly from Patricia's own strategic thinking. I found out about that specific omission secondhand, actually, from a coworker who'd been on the call. She mentioned it casually, not even realizing it might bother me, saying something like, the client loved what Patricia put together for them. I remember feeling a small, uncomfortable twist in my stomach hearing that, but I told myself it was a minor thing. Managers present work built by their teams all the time. That's simply how corporate hierarchies function. I let it go. Looking back now, I think that was exactly the moment she learned something important about me, that I wouldn't push back on it. Over the following year, it happened again and again, each time slightly bigger than the last. A process improvement, I designed that cut report turnaround time by nearly 40%, presented at a leadership meeting as an initiative Patricia had personally spearheaded. A client relationship I'd quietly rebuilt after a rocky renewal conversation, credited afterward to Patricia's strong relationship management. Small phrases repeated often enough. In enough different rooms I wasn't present in, that an entire narrative had built up around her that had almost nothing to do with what she'd actually done, and almost everything to do with what I had. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters for understanding why this went on as long as it did. Patricia wasn't incompetent. She was reasonably capable in her own right, good at managing client relationships on a surface level, good at navigating internal politics. What she was exceptional at, though unusually and specifically exceptional at, was absorbing credit for other people's harder, more technical work and repackaging it as her own strategic vision. in rooms where the people who'd actually done the work were never invited. The project that finally broke this open for me started about a year and a half ago. The company had been trying, unsuccessfully, for over a year to land a major new client, a national retail brand that would have been the largest account in the company's history if we'd won it. Multiple senior people had already taken a run at the pitch and failed to close it. When leadership decided to give it one more attempt, Patricia was assigned to lead it, and I was assigned underneath her to actually build the analytical model that would form the core of the pitch. I spent nearly 5 months on that project. It was, without question, the hardest and most technically ambitious thing I'd built in my career up to that point, involving a predictive model for inventory optimization that needed to work convincingly across an enormous, messy, inconsistent dataset the prospective client had handed over almost as a test to see if we could actually handle their complexity. I worked late nights for weeks at a time. I rebuilt the core model from scratch twice after Patricia asked for changes that, frankly, didn't always make technical sense, quietly fixing the underlying logic each time in ways that made the output still work even when her specific requested changes wouldn't have. 2 weeks before the final pitch to the client's executive team, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of this story, though I didn't fully understand its significance at the time. A member of the company's board, a man named Richard who I'd never interacted with directly before, reached out to me personally over email. He explained that he'd heard, through a conversation with one of our senior VPs, that an analyst on Patricia's team had built the technical core of the upcoming pitch. And he wanted to understand the model firsthand before the client meeting, given how much was riding on this particular deal for the company's growth targets that year. I remember staring at that email for a long time before responding, unsure exactly how to navigate it. Reaching out directly to a board member, bypassing my manager entirely, felt like dangerous territory professionally, regardless of how the email had originated. But it had come to me unsolicited from him, not the other way around, and ignoring a direct request from a board member felt like an even worse professional risk. I mentioned it to Patricia, carefully, expecting her to either handle the response herself or explicitly tell me how she wanted me to proceed. Her reaction told me almost everything I needed to know going forward. She seemed genuinely unsettled, asking me twice exactly what Richard had said, and eventually telling me she'd handle it, instructing me not to respond myself. 2 days later, she informed me she'd spoken with him and that everything was taken care of. I later learned from Richard directly that this conversation had involved Patricia describing the model largely in terms of her own strategic direction and oversight, with my actual technical contribution characterized only vaguely as some assistance from the analytics team. Richard, it turned out, was not entirely satisfied with that answer. Which is why, 3 days before the final pitch, he reached out to me again directly, this time asking if I would be willing to walk him through the technical model myself over a video call. Given that the deal's size meant the board wanted full confidence in the underlying methodology before it went in front of the client. This time I didn't mention it to Patricia first. I said yes. That call lasted almost 90 minutes. Richard asked detailed, genuinely sharp technical questions, the kind that made it immediately clear he understood I was the person who'd actually built the thing. Not someone reciting talking points, someone else had prepared for me. Toward the end of the call, he asked me directly, without any hostility in his tone but with clear intent behind the question, how much of the strategic direction behind the model had come from Patricia versus from my own independent judgment during the build process. I answered honestly. I told him Patricia had provided general direction on the client relationship and had communicated feedback from earlier client conversations, but that the actual technical architecture, the predictive methodology, and the majority of the specific modeling decisions had been mine, developed independently over the 5 months I'd spent building it. I watched something shift in his expression as I said that. Not surprise, exactly. More like confirmation of something he'd already begun to suspect. The pitch itself, 3 days later, went extremely well. The client signed, making it, as promised, the largest account in the company's history. Patricia presented brilliantly. I'll give her that much credit honestly. She was genuinely skilled at reading a room and closing a deal in the moment. Regardless of whatever had built the substance underneath her performance. The company celebrated. There was an all-hands meeting scheduled 2 weeks later specifically to recognize the win publicly in front of the entire staff. I assumed, reasonably I thought, that given everything that had already happened with Richard, my name would at minimum be mentioned during that presentation. I assumed wrong. I sat in the third row of that all-hands meeting and watched Patricia walk through the entire project from start to finish, using slides that were, in some cases, screenshots taken directly from documents I had personally built and sent her for internal review. She described the strategic thinking process, the iterative modeling approach, the months of careful development, entirely in the first person without a single mention of my name, or the analytics team more broadly, or anyone else who had actually built any part of what she was describing. I want to be honest about what I felt sitting in that room because I think the honesty matters here. It wasn't rage, exactly, not in the moment. It was something quieter and colder than that. A very clear, very calm recognition that this had gone on for over a year, that it had just happened at the largest possible scale the company had to offer, in front of literally every single employee, and that if I didn't do something now, it would simply keep happening indefinitely, each time slightly larger than the last, until there was nothing left of my own professional identity that hadn't quietly been absorbed into hers. So I made a decision, sitting in that meeting, watching my own slides click past under someone else's name. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to stand up and object in front of 200 people, which would have accomplished nothing, except making me look unprofessional and emotional in a room where Patricia had just been publicly celebrated. I was going to do something slower and considerably more difficult for her to talk her way out of. The day after that all-hands meeting, I reached out to Richard directly, requesting a brief conversation. I framed it carefully and professionally, not as a complaint, but as a request to understand how the company generally approached recognition and attribution for individual contributors on major deals, given my own experience on this particular project. I wanted to raise the issue through a channel that would actually have influence, rather than venting to coworkers or filing some vague internal complaint that would likely get quietly buried by HR without any real consequence. Richard agreed to meet with me within the week, over coffee near the office rather than in a formal conference room, which I took correctly as it turned out, as a signal that he wanted this conversation to feel less like an official grievance process and more like a candid conversation between two people who both already understood the actual situation. I laid out the full picture for him honestly, without exaggeration and without editorializing more than necessary. I described the dashboard project from 2 years earlier, the process improvement, the client relationship rebuild, and finally the predictive model. Walking him through each instance where credit had been reassigned away from the actual work. I didn't accuse Patricia of anything dramatic or unethical in a legal sense. I simply laid out a clear, factual pattern, repeated consistently across more than a year, of technical and strategic work being systematically absorbed into her own professional narrative without acknowledgement. Richard listened carefully, asking clarifying questions periodically, but largely letting me finish the entire picture before responding. When I was done, he told me something that, honestly, I hadn't fully expected to hear. He said that some of what I described actually confirmed suspicions he and at least one other board member had been quietly forming over the past year. Specifically because Patricia's team had an unusually high turnover rate for analysts compared to other departments of similar size. Something the board had noticed in quarterly reporting without fully understanding the underlying cause. That detail struck me hard, honestly, because it was true, and I hadn't even consciously connected it before that conversation. In the 2 years I'd been on Patricia's team, I'd watched 4 different analysts leave the company entirely, each citing some version of feeling undervalued or overlooked for promotion, despite strong individual performance reviews. I'd always assumed that was simply the nature of a demanding, fast-paced role. Sitting across from Richard, I began to understand it might have been something considerably more specific and more avoidable than that. Richard asked me directly whether I would be willing to have this same conversation formally with the head of HR and one additional board member. Given the scale of the pattern I described and its apparent connection to a broader retention problem the company had been struggling to explain, I understood exactly what I was agreeing to when I said yes. This was no longer a quiet, informal conversation over coffee. This was the beginning of something that would very likely end Patricia's career at the company, one way or another. Regardless of how carefully or professionally it was handled from this point forward. I want to pause here and say something honestly, because I think it matters for anyone in a similar position listening to this. I didn't take that step lightly. I understood that Patricia had a family, that this was likely to be genuinely difficult for her professionally and personally, and I felt a real and complicated mix of emotions about that. Even while feeling completely confident that what she had done, repeatedly over more than a year, was fundamentally wrong and had already caused real harm. Both to me and apparently to several of my former colleagues. Sitting with that complexity honestly, rather than pretending I felt only righteous anger and nothing else, felt important to acknowledge even now. The formal conversation happened about 10 days later, in an actual conference room this time, with HR present alongside Richard and one additional board member. I brought documentation this time, not out of some calculated strategy to destroy her, but because I understood that a serious allegation like this deserved to be backed by more than my own recollection alone. I brought timestamped project files showing my original authorship on the dashboard redesign. I brought the original technical documentation for the predictive model, with version history clearly showing the development timeline over those 5 months, including edits made well before Patricia had ever seen a finished version. I brought the email exchange with Richard from before the final pitch, along with my own contemporaneous notes from our 90-minute technical call, which I'd written up afterwards simply as a habit, never imagining they'd become evidence in a formal review. HR also, separately, reached out to 2 of the former analysts who had left the team over the previous 2 years, asking if they'd be willing to share their own experiences confidentially. Both agreed. Both described patterns strikingly similar to my own, technical or client-facing work they'd personally developed, later presented internally or externally under Patricia's name alone, with no acknowledgement offered even when directly asked about it afterward. The investigation that followed took about 6 weeks. I want to be honest that this period was genuinely uncomfortable to live through, continuing to work in the same office, occasionally in the same meetings as Patricia, all while knowing a formal review of her conduct was quietly underway. She had no idea during most of that time that anything unusual was happening at all. I continued my work normally, said nothing to any coworkers about what was happening, and let the process run its course entirely through the appropriate formal channels, rather than through office gossip or personal confrontation. When Patricia was finally informed that a formal review had been opened, based on a pattern of concerns raised by multiple current and former team members regarding credit attribution and its connection to team retention, her initial response, according to what HR later shared with me in broad terms, was denial, followed by an attempt to characterize the concerns as a single disgruntled employee's misunderstanding rather than a genuine pattern. That characterization became considerably harder to maintain once she learned that 4 separate individuals, across a 2-year period, had independently corroborated substantially similar experiences. The final outcome, delivered about 2 months after that original all-hands meeting where I'd watched my work presented under her name, was that Patricia was let go from the company entirely, following what I understood to be a fairly direct conversation about the pattern of behavior the investigation had documented. I wasn't present for that conversation, obviously, and I want to be honest that I don't know every detail of exactly how it unfolded. What I do know is that within a week of her departure, I was formally offered her position, along with a direct conversation with Richard and the VP overseeing our department, about restructuring the team's recognition practices going forward, specifically to prevent this exact pattern from quietly repeating itself under new leadership. I took the promotion after real consideration. Part of me hesitated, honestly, worried about stepping into a role that had been vacated under circumstances this complicated. Worried about how it would look to colleagues who might not know the full story. But I'd spent over a year watching my own work quietly disappear into someone else's professional narrative. And I understood that turning down the opportunity to finally have my own name attached clearly and directly to my own work would have been its own kind of unnecessary sacrifice. In the months since taking over the role, I've made a specific, deliberate point of doing something Patricia never once did for me. Whenever someone on my team builds something significant, whether it's a model, a client relationship, or a process improvement, their name goes with it explicitly in every room I present it in. Whether that room contains 2 people or 200. I've watched in just a few months a noticeable shift in how engaged and motivated my team seems, and I don't think that's a coincidence. People work considerably harder for a future they can actually see themselves owning some part of. I heard, secondhand, through a former coworker who stayed in touch with people at the company, that Patricia found a role at a smaller firm a few months after leaving, in a position with noticeably less scope and visibility than what she'd held with us. I don't know the full details of how that transition went for her, and honestly, I've made a conscious effort not to spend much energy tracking it. My focus these days is mostly on my own team, and on making sure nobody working underneath me ever has to sit in a third-row seat, watching their own work applauded under somebody else's name. People sometimes ask me whether I regret not confronting Patricia directly and personally the moment I first noticed what was happening, rather than letting it continue for over a year before finally acting. I don't, honestly. If I'd confronted her early on over a single dashboard project or a single process improvement, I would have had nothing beyond my own word against hers. Easily dismissed as a junior employee misunderstanding standard corporate hierarchy. It was only by allowing the pattern to fully reveal itself, and by finally having an independent, external voice in Richard notice the same discrepancy I'd been quietly noticing for over a year. That the full picture became something that couldn't simply be waved away in a single uncomfortable conversation. Because sometimes the most effective response to someone quietly taking credit for your work isn't a single dramatic confrontation in the moment it happens. It's patience and documentation, and waiting for the moment when the pattern becomes so clear and so undeniable that the truth ends up making the argument far more convincingly than you ever could have on your own. If you've ever had a manager or coworker take credit for your work, I want to hear exactly how you handled it in the comments below. And if you want to hear what happened when Patricia reached out to me 8 months later asking for a reference, let me know. Because that conversation might be the single most satisfying 5 minutes of this entire story.